Hello, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting September 26, 2023 of the Marine Resources Commission to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance by Associate Member Bransom and followed by invocation by Associate Member Erskine.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for this day and opportunity to discuss Marine Resource Commission issues. Allow us the reason and wisdom to fairly debate these, and we pray for that. Amen.
Amen. Once again, welcome everyone to our September Commission meeting. Hello to everybody online and welcome as well. Before we get started, I'd like to make a few announcements. We have some new faces in the room in new positions, some not new faces, but new positions. We have two new board members or commission members up here. Mr. Hand to my right, welcome aboard, and Ms. Edwards to my left, welcome aboard. Also, the agency has a new employee. We have Deputy Commissioner John Cosgrove. Welcome. Thank you. Welcome aboard. We all look forward to working with you all. Welcome. That being said, we'll dive right in here. The first thing we have is the approval of the agenda. Are there any corrections, deletions, or changes from the commission members or staff to the current agenda? Mr. Owen?
Mr. Green, good morning. Yes, we'd like to remove item 7, John Eddy, from the agenda. We'll bring it back to you at a later date.
Which ones were those again?
Number 7, John Eddy, remove. All right, this commission operates. Is there any other changes that need to be made to the agenda other than that one from anyone? No. Mr. Branson?
Sure, I move that we accept the amended agenda.
A motion from Mr. Branson, a second from Mr. Minor. Any further discussion on removing item 7 and accepting the agenda as is? After removing 7, that being said, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Minutes. Are there any corrections, deletions, or changes from the commission members or staff from the August 22nd, 2023 commission meeting minutes? Any changes from staff? Commission members? That being said,
Motion to approve.
the motion to approve from Mr. Erskine. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Minor. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next, swear in VMRC staff and VIMs for those who are going to be speaking, presenting testimony during the meeting today. Do you swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. All right, moving right along. Randy, this is on you.
Good morning again. For the benefit of Ms. Edwards and Mr. Hand, our page 2 agenda that's presented by the Habitat Management Division, we usually have something every month on that agenda. These are either subaqueous projects over $500,000 in cost that are not protested, and we are not allowed by statute to approve them administratively. It becomes the commission's responsibility at that price or up. We also serve as the default wetlands board and beach and dune authority for certain localities that haven't adopted the ordinance. So we have an item on here as well where you will serve as the title wetlands board. So I'll dig right in, sir. Item 2A, the City of Norfolk is requesting authorization to conduct mechanical maintenance dredging of up to 10,000 cubic yards of submerged land within Haven Creek to achieve depths of -6 feet, being low at the Haven Creek public boat ramp to the Lafayette River Channel in the City of Norfolk. The material will be removed mechanically and either offloaded at the bulkhead on site for transport via truck to an approved up and disposal site or loaded onto barges and transported to the Craney Island Handling Basin for disposal. Item 2B, the Living River Restoration Trust is requesting authorization to construct a mitigation oyster reef out of clean stone material up to 12 inches thick with a layer of spout-on shell over approximately 3.2 acres in the Lambert's Point reach of the Elizabeth River in the City of Norfolk. Is immediately adjacent to Norfolk Southern's property, for those of you familiar with that area. The reef will be used to offset 0.49 acres of loss of SAV resulting from the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel Expansion Project and other future impacts resulting from public construction projects as may be required by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Item 2C, West Rock CP LLC is requesting authorization to construct a 20 million gallon per day replacement. This is a lot of words here, guys, sorry. Primary surface water intake with 1 millimeter mesh screen slots, a maximum through slot velocity of 0.25 feet per second, and to retrofit their existing auxiliary intake at the industrial facility on the James River in the city of Hopewell. The project will include an offshore enclosure and walkway to house a new airburst system, 6 7-pile timber dolphins, 26 freestanding timber piles, and that's to protect this facility from future navigation strikes. The original intake was taken out in about the 2013 timeframe by a barge. Recommend an approval contingent on the use of cushion blocks and rampart procedures in the installation of hollow steel pilings, and restricting the use of the intake of the auxiliary intake for routine maintenance of the primary intake during the months of November through January, and that's to maximize protection of any smaller life stages of anadromous fishes and other estuarine organisms in that area. We're also recommending a royalty in the amount of $18,534 for the encroachment over 9,267 square feet of subacreous land at the industrial rate of $2 per square foot. And lastly, item 2D, this is where you are serving as the default wetlands board for King and Queen County. Edward Walton is requesting authorization to construct a 41-foot long low profile groin with a 22-foot T-head situated along the Mattapanite River at 904 Brookshire Road in King and Queen County. The project requires a VMRC wetlands permit. In this particular case, the majority of this groin structure is in the subacreous reach, where it will be handled by a general permit by our division. You're basically looking just at the groin's encroachment from mean high to mean low water. And those are my comments.
Any questions for Chief Owen from the commission? Thank you, Randy. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on this matter, for or against? One once? One twice? All right, that being said, matters before the commission.
I make a motion
Mr. Headley?
to approve page 2 items.
Mr. Headley makes a motion to approve page 2 items. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Minor. Any further discussion? That being said, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. All right, moving right along. We don't have any consent agenda items on 3. We don't need a closed session, do we?
No, sir.
Closed session needed by council. Moving right along. Mr. Woodward, number 5, it looks like.
Good morning, Commissioner Green, members of the commission. Welcome, Ms. Edwards and Mr. Hand. I'm Jay Woodward, one of the engineers on staff. This project is Jeff Bain. Bring it up here on the screen. Mr. Bain is requesting authorization to install 200 linear feet of quarry stone riprap in front of an existing timber bulkhead at property on the Rappahannock River at 1142 Fort Lowry Lane in Essex County. And the project in this case is protested by both of the adjacent property owners. Fort Lowry is this point of land on the Rappahannock River in Essex County. It's approximately 7 miles downstream of Tappahannock. That's the Route 360 bridge going over the river. Exposure to the northwest, again, about a 7-mile fetch. This area, like many others, was exposed to a lot of damage from Hurricane Isabel all along this reach of shoreline. Back, I guess, 20 years ago it was. The applicant's shoreline has a deteriorated concrete cap timber bulkhead with several failed timber groins, as well as a damaged pier, the majority of which was sustained during Isabel. The proposal is to install a wedge of quarry stone riprap with a base width of 6 feet that extends on the landward side up and over the top of the existing bulkhead. There's a narrow, sandy, non-vegetated wetland on the west side of the property, whereas the east side of the property, low water falls right up against the bulkhead. So there's no intertidal zone on that end. It's all submerged lands of the Commonwealth at that point. The impacts resulting from the proposal is 636 square feet of non-vegetated wetlands. That's already been approved by the local wetlands board in Essex. And the 564 square feet of subaqueous bottom conversion into intertidal riprap, which is what we're here to discuss today. This gives you an idea of the proposal. There's going to be from property line on the west to the property line on the east. It's all bulkheaded, as the majority of these properties are in this reach of shoreline, and the stone will extend 6 feet out and up to the top of and just over top of the existing low timber bulkhead. The bulkhead actually has a cap of concrete incorporated into the design, and in some places that cap is starting to, it's undermined and is giving way. This gives you another little bit better idea, some of the details of the project. Just essentially riprap in front of the old bulkhead. It's kind of a standard approach as opposed to a new bulkhead in front of the old. In profile, on the left side, profile A would be the west side of the project. The low tide line comes up to about here. So this is an intertidal zone in front of the existing bulkhead, and these impacts were heard and approved by the Wetlands Board in Essex County. Standard design, filter cloth, buried toe, small stone is the core and larger stone is armor. And then on the east side of the project, the low tide line does fall right up against the bulkhead, so there is no intertidal zone. This is all submerged land impact, and the area that's been undermined and caved in behind the bulkhead, non-jurisdictional areas that'll be backfilled to get a proper grade. These are pictures submitted with the application looking various directions. This is looking to the west, looking to the east, a little bit more close view showing the condition. You can see the failed pier structure and remnants of the old timber groins. You can see here where the concrete has given way and starting to get some failure of the yard in behind. And again, looking west and looking west from the easternmost property line. These are some site photos I took showing on the east side. You do have a little bit of sandy intertidal beach or non-vegetated wetland, and the area of stone has been approved by the Wetlands Board in this case. Now we're on the other end looking west. You can just see the condition of the structures. This apparently was an old railway of some kind that is going to be taken up and hasn't been in use and will no longer be used. They're not going to leave a gap here to allow that rail structure to be used or repaired. It's just going to be stone right straight across the face of the bulkhead. The project is protested by both adjacent property owners. Donna Langford is the property owner to the west. She was present at the Wetland Board hearing and spoke in opposition to the project. In her letter of opposition, she expresses concern that as designed, the revetment will erode her sand beach on her side, and the small rocks will not stay in place. She believes the direction of sand movement will be adversely affected. She also feels the corner of their property will be destroyed, believes the riprap will increase the snake population around the rock area, and states there is no riprap on any of the other properties that are near this property. The owners to the east, John and Mary Lee Corello, indicate that Mr. Bain has essentially abandoned the property since Hurricane Isabel. They've asked him repeatedly to repair or replace the bulkhead for years and not use riprap. They feel the riprap requires frequent maintenance and repair, and they believe that Mr. Bain will likely not undertake those repairs. In a second protest letter, they reiterate their concerns about the riprap requiring maintenance and indicate that the failed pier, groins, and buildings on the property are constantly falling into the river, and Mr. Bain has not been responsible in maintaining the structures on his property. As I had mentioned previously, the Essex County Wetlands Board approved the impacts to the non-vegetated wetlands at the west end of the property at their July 27th, 2023 public hearing. Compensation was not required in this case, as the board felt that the impacts were not really a loss of intertidal zone, but merely a conversion of non-vegetated sandy shoreline into intertidal riprap community. There are no leased oyster grounds in the area, nor are there any beds of submerged aquatic vegetation. In summary, the existing bulkhead and other shoreline structures are clearly in need of repair and/or total replacement. Staff generally prefers the installation of a properly designed riprap revetment, or wedge in this case, using properly sized stone, towed-in, on-filter cloth, as it better dissipates wave energy rather than just reflecting the energy in a vertical plane. The stone is proposed at a stable 1.5 to 1 slope in accordance with standard design for this type of stone wedge in front of an existing wall with a buried toe, smaller core stone covered with larger armor stone of class 2 or larger. In addition, it's staff's experience that a proper stone revetment requires actually less maintenance than vertical bulkheads constructed of timber sheet piles. While the majority of the properties along this reach of shoreline do have bulkheads and groins, or a combination thereof, some of the properties to the east have gone over to riprap in front of the bulkhead rather than constantly building bulkhead in front of bulkhead as they go along. Accordingly, staff believes the project is revised, and the revisions include the initial application showed smaller stone than we would normally recommend, and that was a mistake by the agent who corrected that to go with a larger size stone given this high wave energy environment. We recommend approval of the project with a condition that all of the failed groins and derelict pier structures be removed from state-owned subaqueous bottom prior to the installation of the riprap revetment. In a lot of cases, we'll see projects come forward that are designed to address the failure of whatever structure was there before, and it's kind of a given that once the construction is in there, they remove all the old stuff, and before they mobilize away from the project, after they've done the new work, it's all cleaned up. In this case, we wanted to make sure that that's addressed prior to any additional work over state bottom, given the negligence or the neglect of the structures that have been failed for more than 20 years along this applicant's property. It is actually noted in section 28.2.12.10 of the Code of Virginia, the commission may require removal of abandoned structures in a state of disrepair. And again, generally that happens as a part of the new construction, but we felt it best to maybe get that on the record and make it a permit condition if the commission so chooses. That's all I have. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions. I honestly don't know if anybody is here, applicant, agent, or property owners, but you can ask the question.
I will. Is there any questions for Mr. Woodward from the commission? Mr. Erskine?
So Jay, you mentioned the derelict pier pilings and the bulkhead that would not be used in this proposal. What about that railway? That's included in the pier to remove if they're not going to utilize that anymore?
Yeah, we would likely, with the commission's blessing, incorporate a condition into the permit that all derelict structures, to include the pier piles, groins, and railway, be removed from state-owned bottom where we have jurisdiction. I don't know that I have a whole lot of heartburn with leaving the 6 feet of groin as it comes out from the bulkhead that's going to be wrapped with stone, but there's not a lot there. I mean, I don't know where it's all gone over the years, downriver on other properties, but I think it would just be prudent to include that as a permit condition.
All right, thank you.
Any more questions? Mr. Headley?
Is Mr. Bain looking to rebuild the dock too? Because if we require him to take all the poles up, that's going to have to be a new permit, which
as I understand it right now, if he leaves a couple of the poles there, he can rebuild it without the permit.
Well, as a private, non-commercial riparian residential pier, it would be exempt by statute to be replaced. I don't think that this pier is in a condition that can be repaired. I think it would be a wholesale replacement. And you're right, there's recent legislation that indicates that if you have an existing pier that was authorized, i.e. an application submitted in our records and blessed by us, that pier can be replaced without need for an additional JPA. But again, it would be a non-commercial residential riparian exempt pier. There was no request to do any maintenance or repairs to any of the shoreline structures beyond just the riprap wedge in this application.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you, Jay. Appreciate it. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on this matter, for or against? That being said, matters before the commission.
Move to approve staff recommendations.
Got a motion to approve staff recommendations from Mr. Minor and a second from Mr. Erskine. Any further discussion? So staff recommendation will be the permit conditions that were mentioned by Mr. Woodward. Further discussion? That being said, matters before the commission. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Jay.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Welcome Associate Commissioners Edwards and Hand and Deputy Commissioner Cosgrove. I'm not sure where he went. My name is Tiffany Burge. I'm also an engineer with Habitat Management, and we'll be briefing this next case for you. Tian Fei and Daking Lee are requesting after-the-fact authorization to retain approximately 250 linear feet of riprap revetment and install 87 linear feet of new riprap revetment adjacent to their property on Ducking Point Trail situated along the western branch Lynnhaven River in the city of Virginia Beach. In July 2022, staff received an application requesting authorization to install 337 linear feet of riprap revetment, which was being processed for a subaqueous permit. The application was submitted correctly. However, the public interest review and draft permit were never issued or completed because the required newspaper advertisement affidavit had not been received by VMRC staff. It was recently brought to our attention in July of 2023 that a portion of the revetment, approximately 250 linear feet, had been installed prior to receiving the VMRC permit. Here's a vicinity map of the property indicated by the yellow wetland marker. For reference, this is the western branch of the Lynnhaven River. The Lesner Bridge is right up at the top. Eastern branch over here, Long Creek and Broad Bay is just off screen. And then here's a close-up aerial view of the property. You can note the close proximity to the upland improvements to the existing bulkhead. The original application also included a request to modify the existing private pier that you see on screen. This request met the exemption outline in code, and a partial no permit necessary letter was sent out in September of 2022 for that work. In that letter, it did state that the permit would be required for the riprap revetment. This is a 2023 aerial taken from the city GIS website. I believe the photo was taken in early 2023. You can see that part of the riprap revetment had been installed and the equipment is still on site. By the time staff was notified that the riprap had been installed, the riprap was installed up to about this point right here. After we were notified by the agent that the project had been partially installed, we received as-built drawings, project drawings submitted later that month by the agent. Mean low water is shown in blue up in this northeast corner, and the rest of the property has mean low water situated at the bulkhead. And then the next few slides are a series of section or close-up plan views of the riprap that had been installed and had not been installed. So the gray riprap shown is what was previously proposed but had not yet been installed. The yellow riprap shown had been installed at that time that we were notified. So there are portions on both sides of the property that hadn't quite been installed yet. Here are 2 cross-sections submitted by the agent for the riprap. This one is of the western side of the property where the mean low water is shown all the way up to the bulkhead. This is the cross-section at that northeastern side where mean low water does not quite hit the bulkhead. These were non-vegetated wetlands that were heard and approved by the Wetlands Board. These are photos from a site visit that staff conducted with the City of Virginia Beach in August of 2022, prior to the riprap being installed. And these are photos taken by staff in July of 2023 after that installation. And here are just a couple other photos taken by staff. You can see the non-vegetated wetlands that were approved by the board of City of Virginia Beach Wetlands Board up in that corner of the photo. So as I mentioned, back in September of 2022, the Wetlands Board heard and approved the impacts to non-vegetated wetlands proposed by the riprap. Staff at around the same time also received adjacent property owner signatures from the agent for the work for the pier and for the pier boathouse and the riprap. The Army Corps of Engineers also issued their joint regional permit 18 and 19 for both components. And staff requested the newspaper to run in the paper around that same time in September of 2022. It was later brought to our attention, like I mentioned, that the newspaper ad did not run. The contractor stated that he did not realize that the news ad never ran prior to pulling the building permit with the city and beginning work. Once he was notified that the riprap had been installed prior to receiving the permit, he did find the original request to the newspaper and paid for that ad, and it did run in July of 2023. Flint Marine Construction, the contractor in this case, has now appeared before this commission twice in the past 8 months for unauthorized installations associated with an after-the-fact riprap revetment in February and an after-the-fact modification to an existing private pier which required a permit in July of 2023. In both cases, Mr. Owen agreed to pay a $3,000 civil charge in lieu of further enforcement action, and both of those cases were brought before you as a page 3 consent agenda item. Given that this represents the 3rd violation of Flint Marine Construction in less than 1 year, staff felt that it was appropriate to include this as a full-page briefing this month and recommends assessing a civil charge to the contractor in the amount of $6,000. This is based on the moderate degree of environmental impact and the somewhat major degree of noncompliance as outlined in the Commission's approved civil charge matrix that are provided on pages 5 and 6 of your book items. Staff finds that the project meets the criteria outlined in Section 28.2-1205 and would have been administratively approved had the news ad run and been submitted to staff. Since the agent and contractor handled the entire permit application process for the property owner, staff does not feel that it is appropriate to assess the applicant's a civil charge. However, they have agreed to the standard assessment of triple permit fees, which in this case totals $900. It is unclear to staff why the authorized agent did not fully explain the permit process to the applicants at the time that the application was submitted. However, since Mr. Butler, the agent in this case, notified staff of the unauthorized activity, we do not feel that it is appropriate to assess him a civil charge. The contractor, however, was fully aware that the VMRC permit was required prior to beginning work, and that did not occur. So accordingly, staff recommends commission after-the-fact approval of the 250 linear feet of riprap revetment that has already been installed, with the aforementioned triple permit fees assessed to the applicants and civil charge of $6,000 assessed to the contractor. This is for the riprap's encroachment over state-owned bottom. Staff also recommends the approval of the remaining 87 linear feet of riprap revetment that was proposed originally, so that the applicants can get the rest of the riprap revetment that they are intending to protect their property. Should Mr. Owen choose not to agree to the civil charge today, staff recommends that the commission direct the Office of Attorney General to pursue civil penalties against him for the unauthorized construction not to exceed $25,000 by the appropriate circuit court for each day of the violation pursuant to Section 28.2, 1213 of the Code of Virginia. That concludes staff's presentation. I'm available for any questions you may have. I am aware that the agent, Mr. Butler, and the contractor, Mr. Owen, are available for your questions today. I do not believe the applicants are present.
Any questions from Mr. Branson?
Thank you, sir. Tiffany, thank you. If you could just recap for me, they pulled permits to the Wetlands Board or Virginia Beach building permits in the fall, September of 2022?
I'm not exactly sure when the building permit was pulled. It was sometime prior to construction. The Wetlands Board approved and issued their permit for the impact to non-vegetated wetlands in September. The Army Corps of Engineers submitted their permit to us in September. Per the contractor, the construction commenced in the early parts of 2023, I believe January, February timeframe. So I would imagine the building permit was pulled sometime just before that, but I'm unsure exactly when.
And then the public notice, that should have gone out in the fall of last year, went out this past summer.
That's correct. We, staff requested that the news ad be placed in the paper back in September when all of the other permits were being issued. Somehow that did not occur, and before we can move forward with a draft permit, we require the receipt of an affidavit and a copy of that news ad, which, since it didn't run, we never received that copy.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions from the commission? Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you. That being said, is the applicant or an agent for the applicant present wish to speak on this matter? Please state your name for the record in the microphone.
Morning, this is Pete at Flint Marine.
Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your name, your full name, please.
Pete Owen.
You don't, okay.
Appreciate your time in dealing with this. In this particular case, if we want to back up a little bit, this particular applicant, English is their second language, so that's one fact. I appreciate them taking a look at not, finding them any piece there. Fines that all going towards them. The process is long. We contracted with them a year prior, probably in 21, maybe it was in 22, late 21, just to get the permit going. It takes a long process, as you guys are aware of. Backing up on the other two fines, both of those projects, we're kind of the subcontractor. One, there was a GC on that hearing, and that GC was the owner's rep in charge of everything, the house renovations and all. The second one, kind of same thing. They were also running the GC on lots of renovations, et cetera. So we agreed to those fines prior and got all those settled out. So we apologize for that. Since then, being such a long process, these folders get thick. Our person handling all this retired from us this past January after a long, grueling time in this industry all the way around. And so long story short, on this particular case, it kind of fell through the cracks. We did apply for permits back in that time frame. His job at the office, or my office staff, was like every job, they require to go get the Army Corps, the different Wetlands Board, all different permissions. This one here might have been some confusion on our part overall with, I guess, the partial approval with the letter. We carried all the letters to the local city, which is the City of Virginia Beach. Looks like that was, permit was issued after everything was, I guess, approved and all the different files were put together, we carried the package down to city, and that was right around the end of September, and permit application was on 9/30. So last year is when we applied for the permit and received. And the customer could only afford the main part around the house that you could see there. The bulkheads were pushing right against the house, it was kind of pushing out. And their concern was just doing the main part first. So they were really anxious to get going, of course, like most owners are on their project, anxious to get going on phase one. And phase one was just the main part where the house was, and they wanted to do phase two, the dock work later, the boathouse later, as they can afford it on different phases. We actually started the project, had the office pull, our records. It's kind of a mess at our office half the time, but it's a lot of stuff to track. And we had our first order of rock delivered a month later, October 20th, 2022. So we began the process in that amount of time after we acquired the permit a month prior from the city of Virginia Beach. Unfortunately, I guess each city runs differently. If, we could go backwards in time and take a look at the fact that it was a partial permit approval from VMRC and not a full approval. The city, our hope one day is the city doesn't approve any permits and be released to save people that are blue collar, just working in the field, and the office goes and acquires permits as much as we can all the time, because the pressure's always on us to get to the next project, and therefore, I did acquire, as they mentioned, the article that was sent in. It was October 4th, 2022, which was, after this was sent in, the public notice from the VMRC between really the cracks in the wood or the homeowners not understanding all that was going on, which is not to their fault. We just found emails right around that date saying, hey, you need to pay this $80 or $100, whatever it was. So for that, obviously, that fell through the cracks. But, the permit-wise, we acquired the permit and we began work back then. They were worried about their property leaning over. Believe me, we had plenty of work to do on other projects that had permits already as well. So long story short, this kind of fell through the cracks here. And so when we were notified, I guess, this past year, which we probably wrapped this project up, probably might be January or February for that portion of phase one, we'll call it. That portion was wrapped up. And so months later, summertime, we were notified by VMRC that there was something missing. So we immediately complied and found the article and ran it July 20th, 2023, which, as you heard earlier stated, was approved. The neighbors are all trying to get their work done as they have other issues. It's all residential here. There was no, the APOs went through with no problem. There was no protest. So at the end, really, it was just a paperwork glitch on this. And since this past year, we've tried to email the VMRC just about every project. I don't know, sometimes 2 or 3 a week. What's the status? This one's almost ready. That one there's no need for the VMRC's approval for that, so that one's good to go. So a lot of emails have been going back and forth for quite a while, all this past year, trying to comply better. And as we're missing a key employee, which is hard to replace nowadays, that used to do all this kind of things, we're training other people at the office now. So at the end, that's really the overall story of what we have going on. We also, sometimes we send items in, and recently an article is missing. It's almost ready, but the article's missing. Like, my gosh, for the love of God, pay the $80 right away. And that was like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it's been about 3.5 weeks, and I think that another project is about to get approved as well. And so things are just backed up for us all the way around. So my request was today, I guess, to explain the overall story of where we're at. And after the pledge, my prayer was to ask for mercy and to get a hall pass for this one, since it wasn't anything done on purpose, or it wasn't something we're trying to run around everywhere and do, because there's so much work we already have permanent to do. So we didn't need to start this at that time. It was literally something that fell through the cracks. So I'm just here to explain the overall picture where we're at. And what we're doing going forward is emailing once a week, at least every other week, on checking on permits that are about to come up or they're missing something. VMRC sometimes states, well, we need to stake something out first. So, we wait and get boats out there and wait. Wait. Customers, as you can imagine, they're just over anxious, like anyone that's about to pay a lot of money or have paid a lot of money for the overall process and the timeline that it takes. And it does take what it takes. We try to explain the Army Corps and the city that you're in and the VMRC is all separate things, and all those stars have to align before we commence forward. We had a few recently. There was a dredging project and a groin that had to be built, and it was all approved. And then we go to get the permit back in May, and there was a glitch with the permitting. They tied in the dredging with the groin, and so of course we skipped that whole project, saying we'll just wait till we emailed Miss Tiffany at her office, and she says, yeah, there is a glitch, and we'll try to work that out. And they did, and I believe the permit, city permit, put it that way, is going to be issued anytime, I believe, now. Or I think it is. I think that was approved. So that's where I'm at.
Any questions for the speaker? Mr. Branson?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Mr. Owen, thank you for showing up today. How long have you been in business, doing this business?
Started in 2017.
Okay, and primarily in Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Chesapeake, that
Most of those areas.
The south side of Hampton Roads.
Prior to that, I had a company since '96, which was mostly building renovations, commercial asset, service call, things like that.
And how many projects do you do a year?
From marine side,
I mean, I know they vary from docks to simple dock
boat
to
lift, service call work,
Sure, but how many requiring permits from the city
Requiring the permits
and the
all the way
commission
around?
a year?
I'd probably say, I guess it'd be about 10.
10 a year?
Yeah.
I don't understand, if you've been in business for the time you stated and you do this many projects, that you don't have a grasp on all the permitting that you need, whether it's a wetlands in Virginia Beach or a building permit that I imagine every municipality requires you to have to do something like this, and then the VMRC permit because you're going over state-owned lands. I don't understand how this happens. I mean, it's been 3 times. This is the 3rd visit since I've been on the commission, a year and a half, that you've come forth. I'm kind of questioning how many more times, how many more projects do you have out here that you have not followed the permitting process that we're going to see in the next year or 2 years or whatever?
Well, to answer your question, the process is kind of tricky with all the different portions and pieces. I had a guy in place that was trying to handle all those items. Those other couple projects, those other 2 that they mentioned earlier, I agreed to what I had to agree to at the time because there was a general contractor on site pushing those and getting everything arranged.
Yeah, but that one with Mr. Augustine, you overbuilt the permit. It wasn't an issue of permit, you overbuilt the permit.
Well, the drawings we had that was different. The drawings we had was overbuilt. It went from floating dock to secured. So it wasn't that we had made it 6 foot wide versus 5. It was right on the drawings on that particular case. But I didn't want to come up and make a long story. I just said, okay, we'll agree to that. The other project that had some riprap, once again, APOs, et cetera, were all handled by the general contractor on site doing multiple renovations.
You can look at the projects you have pending now to make sure that you are following the permit? And
Yeah, so that's
coordinating
where we had a meeting here at your office about, and I think ever since, I don't know, this past year, it's been lots of emails going in to, like I said, almost every other week, checking on project statuses, just like the Groin project and other 3 or 4 others that we're still waiting on. And one recently was waiting on an article, and our office made sure the homeowner didn't pay the $80. We paid it so we could get that rolling. Because not all of them need the newspaper article. Some of them have oyster bed rights at the bottom. Lots of moving parts. And like I said, our key person had retired at the end of last year, and we're happy for him, but not as happy for us. Replacing and training all that takes quite a bit. And so I'll rely on my office staff to try to navigate all those items. They have like a celebration. Hey, the permit's ready. So I just get an email with a permit, copy, et cetera. I'm like, well, send it to the customer. Let's have a pre-con with the city so we can begin work. So that's where a lot of those changes have been made, through this process, to answer your question.
Okay.
Any more questions from the commission? Thank you. Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak on this matter? That being said, matter is before the commission. Mr. Minor,
Move to approve staff recommendations.
a motion to approve staff recommendations from Mr. Minor. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Mr. Bransom. Is there any further discussion needed?
Yes.
Mr. Hand?
I question the civil fine, whether it is any more than the cost of doing business, given the previous two cases and no change in the actions. I mean, to me, a marine contractor is responsible for the marine portion of a job, and whether they are the general contractor or not. And this being the third strike leads me to think it could continue. Marine work pays well, and $3,000 is nothing. Again, that's the cost of doing business. If I know I'm gonna get that fine, it's worth it. And finish a project and move on.
Yeah, I think,
Question that, and, I mean, to me, we're being lenient if we didn't push to go after licenses for a third strike. So, anyway,
yeah, we don't have the authority to go after
yeah,
the
well, I mean,
Yeah.
there's people that do.
Yeah.
So, but, I'm not pushing for that. I'm just saying the civil penalty should be such that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I think the motion, or the staff's recommendation was 6,000 this time, is that correct? So it's 6,000 on this one.
Right.
And
And triple permit fees. for
triple
the-
permit fees from the applicant. I think, we have a motion and a second. Is, are you putting an amendment forward, or are you just making a comment?
At this point, I'm making a comment, but, bring it up to discussion.
Mr. Erskine?
And I appreciate, looking a little bit closer at some of the violation, the fact that this is kind of strike three. I would only note that in his testimony, in the contractor's testimony, he did say that there's a new system in place for checking on some of these permits, and he's in communication with VMRC. So I would say it would be my hope that this would be the last time. You obviously have the contractor has multiple projects going on at once, and the excuse, in my opinion, cannot be that it just kind of fell through the cracks. It's a hard stop if you don't have a VMRC permit to move forward. Contractors should know that, period. But hopefully your new process that's in place that the contractor has would be sufficient. So I'm comfortable with the motion on the floor.
Any more discussion? All right, that being said, we have a motion and a second. We'll carry this to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Yes. Mr. Owen, you come forward, please. Now I'm broaching the next question to you is, do you agree to the commission's decision for the $6,000 penalty?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Tiffany. Adam, looks like you're up next.
Good morning. I have two items that come in front of the commission today. They're both very similar in nature. They are both consideration of oyster planting grounds, both in the Broad Bay, Lynn Haven area. Although we'll take them separate, the conversations around them are probably very similar and will have similar undertones. The first one to come in front of you is an application 2021-062 for First Landing Seafood Company. They're requesting approximately 40 acres of oyster planting ground in the Broad Bay area, the city of Virginia Beach. The application is protested by nearby property owners. So just to orient everyone, Lynn Haven is down here on the south side. Broad Bay, more specifically, butts up against the park on the north. The area that we're looking at today from First Landing is outlined here in red. This is approximately 40 acres. This was advertised in accordance with 282606, and notifications was sent to adjacent leaseholders and nearby property owners within 200 feet of this area. So far, the agency has received 18 public comments, 16 opposed, 1 in favor, 1 neutral. All those public comments are available in the packets in front of you. I won't read through them word from word, but just to summarize some of the concerns in this area, it is a heavily navigated, heavily recreational use area. So a lot of the public comments surround recreational uses. They are concerned about navigation, concerned about surface level hazards, whether it be poles or buoys. There's concerns about bottom cages and bottom aquaculture in this area, whether that be navigation by boats, individuals falling off jet skis and hitting themselves in the cages. There's also concerns about what they call viewscape, or keeping the natural state of things. People want to be able to look out their window, enjoy the area in this natural environment. There is 1 in favor that supports this project, and there is 1 neutral. The neutral one I categorize from the city of Virginia Beach that comments on all applications in this area. What they request is there's a setback from any major channel, and you can see from this map that when they applied, they did set it back from the major area of the channel. So that's the neutral one that doesn't need to be addressed. With this application, staff has no objections to this. Staff has an internal review on all these to look at the public interest. Some of the public interest things that staff can look at is things like condemnation zones. This is clearly not in a condemnation zone. We can look whether or not an application is right on top of submerged aquatic vegetation. This is not the case here. And we can look on whether or not it's in a major navigable channel. That doesn't fall into a navigable channel either. One of the other items that the Code of Virginia allows to consider is other reasonable uses of subaqueous ground. And that's when we get 18 public comments about the use of recreational activity in the area, that it makes it more difficult for staff to approve or deny these things. And that's why we bring it in front of the commission today for consideration on these items. So this is an area that is already used for aquaculture, cage aquaculture to be for specific. The applicant, First Landing Seafood Company, you can see on the map, already has an area down here which they use. They own this entire lease down here. So they already do this kind of aquaculture in this area. You can see all the area that is in brown here that is already mapped. Those are already previously approved leases. So when we talk about bottom cages, when we talk about aquaculture, anywhere in those brown areas is already approved by the commission to be used in this manner. So we're not setting a precedent in this area. This is not something new coming into Broad Bay. It's something that has previously done. This area specifically in red was leased back in 2008, so it's previously a leased bottom for aquaculture. When renewal, these are 10-year leases, and when lease renewal comes up after 10 years, they have to meet minimum planting and harvesting guidelines. This particular area did not meet those minimum harvesting and planting guidelines, therefore it wasn't renewed, so it became open ground, and that's where we land on this application today. The applicant is here. He's generally been a good steward of the area, has worked with the constituents and areas to minimize some of the conflicts. He does have a small area around here. He will be available to speak on behalf of what his plans are for the ground. His use questionnaire that we send out does say that he intends on doing bottom cages in that area. This would be for a 10-year lease, so he is looking at expanding his operation to different areas. The Code of Virginia allows the commission to grant or deny permit the use of state-owned bottomlands, taking into consideration the public and private benefits of the proposed project. Although staff has no objection to this area being leased as bottom ground, we are requesting guidance from the commission to approve or deny the application based on consideration of the objections raised by local residents, comments concerning the support of the request, and consideration of the public trust doctrine. So I'll take 1 minute to say that all these applications are available on our website. We do have a new availability for not only for individuals to view these on our website, to comment live. I took public comments right up until about 9 o'clock this morning, where people were still submitting public comments, so that is available. So we try and be as transparent as we can between notifying adjacent lease owners and property owners, putting it advertising in newspaper, as well as allowing it on our website. So the applicant is here today to speak on behalf of the application, but I'm happy to take any questions about this area or any of the public comments that you see in your packet.
Any questions from Mr. Kenyon, from the commission? Mr. Headley?
How much water is in that area?
So this particular area, on low tide, mid tide, is anywhere from 6 to 10 feet. So it can vary with any kind of on the bottom cages. You cannot impede navigation, meaning that if you put a 12-inch cage in 12 inches of water, you're impeding navigation, and that's illegal. We have ways to address that. So there can be no aquaculture above 12 inches off the ground. So there should be enough clearance for any kind of overboat traffic.
Mr. Headley?
Is there any, I guess, laws about how bottom cages are marked?
Yes, there are. So we do have regulation on how these are marked. When you have an active working area, you need to mark your corners with poles. But within that marking regulation, there is an exemption we can request from staff. Obviously, different areas require different amounts of markings, and we have the ability to work with the applicant as well as the nature of the area to come up with an alternative marking plan. Talking through commenters on this, some people in shallow areas prefer more markings. They want more buoys out there because they don't want to run through it at night and not be able to see it. Others people in deeper areas want less markings. They don't want any hazards on the surface because they want to jet ski through the air and they want to pull tubes. So I do get comments for everyone that wants less marking. I generally get someone who wants more marking. That's why the commission had a lot of foresight in crafting this regulation, that we can approve exceptions to this to try to mitigate some of that conflict, whether it be with more buoys, less buoys, with poles, without poles, something that's suitable for the area for that safety.
Thank you.
Mr. Branson?
Thank you, Commissioner. Chief, thank you. I'd just like to point out that this Broad Bay is an extremely busy area for recreational activities. They did offset these leases away from the navigation channel, but it's gotten to be so busy in there that the Coast Guard and the city removed the day markers, the big piling day markers, because they were being struck by vessels. And I have grave concern about any PVC markings or bamboo or wooden stake markings that are called out in regulation as perimeter markings being put along, even in close vicinity of a navigation channel. Buoys are one thing, but, our regulation calls for and allows for an exception approved by the chief of shellfish management. And I don't know if we can, this question, Commissioner, for council, if we approve this, stipulate or require that buoyage markings be used over something as an exception. Is that,
So requesting upon approval
if it is considered approval
some
from the
kind of
commission?
condition that would require then some kind of alternative marking plan with staff.
I don't see why not. I haven't looked at that particular regulation in a bit, but I believe staff mentioned that there's an allowance for an exception on the
Yes.
type of markers.
Regulation 29050 allows for an exception on that. So as far as my knowledge is, we cannot put permit conditions on approving oyster ground lease bottoms. It's not like a joint permit application where we can't put conditions. But we can speak to the applicant. He is
This
here
is,
today and operate in good faith that we are trying to mitigate these safety hazards.
I'd like to hear from him, but this is a bit of an exception. I wasn't around when we approved some of the other oyster leases that you show up there in the brown, but I know this water very well, and it's putting a fixed object in a near a navigation channel with so much high-speed traffic, because there is no speed restriction in that center piece that you show. There is a no-wake zone outside Broad Bay, the Narrows, and that's where they've been hitting the navigation markers, which are big reflective signs at night, and they knock them over. I mean, we're talking day marker pilings that are probably 10 to 12 inches in diameter. And they finally removed them because of the impact. And my concern is that we put more obstructions in the water like that, that's a big safety issue, in my opinion. Plus, the jet skiers, the tubers, all the people that get towed around there, they're more likely to be to fare well with a buoy that they run over than a PVC pipe that they run into. So.
And the applicant is here, so he can speak to that, but he has relayed to me that he is open to any kind of alternative markings to mitigate those safety concerns, to be able to use the bottom responsibly and as a good steward of the area.
I just want to, I've looked at the whole regulation now, and it seems very clear to me that the applicant can put out buoys or stakes, and it specifically says that the leases shall be marked with markers or buoys and shall be marked in a manner that does not create any unnecessary restriction to navigation, and that's 4 VAC 229030A. So I think if we're saying we think that stakes are going to cause hazard to navigation, then not only is it permissible for us to say we want you to do something different, but it is required by the regulation. So I see absolutely no problem with that.
Mr. Erskine.
Thank you, Adam. A question going back to the red area, the leased area. You said it was, it's obviously vacant now, but it was previously leased, did not meet the renewal requirements.
Right.
But previous to that, it must have been a lease. Did it have mandatory harvest reports prior to that?
No, it didn't
Was
have.
being
It didn't have
worked, I
any
guess?
production on it. The first time I could have it being leased bottom was starting in 2008. So I didn't have any production records going prior to that.
And as a follow-up, Mr. Commissioner,
Mr. Erskine.
are you aware of the bottom type? You know, you said the depth, but
It's more of a sandy area. That's why bottom cages work in this area. Maybe some of the deeper areas won't be as good, but targeting that 6 to 10. But again, the applicant is here. He can probably speak to how he's going to use that bottom.
okay, thank you.
Any more questions from the commission? Thank you, Adam. Is the applicant here? Wish to speak? Please come forward. Please state your name for the record on the microphone.
Yes, sir. Bruce McLaughlin.
Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Proceed.
Good morning, Commissioner Green, members of the board. My name is Bruce McLaughlin. I am the co-founder and CEO for First Landing Seafood Company. As stated earlier, we do currently lease and actively work one of the leases in Broad Bay. We've been in business now for 3 years. We're at the point where we are just about at break even and ready to start turning a profit, hopefully at the end of this year. Our intent with this is to expand our operations and take advantage of economies of scale, since we've already been doing it on a smaller basis. We feel that expanding our operation into this area and into subsequent leases will afford us the opportunity to increase our profits. While being good stewards, we actually own property on Broad Bay, on Bay Island, so we're aware of the traffic. We do not work on weekends. We try to stay out of the waterway completely when there is high traffic, and we try to be good stewards. One of the things we've done this year, as you're aware of the tornado that hit earlier in Virginia Beach, we led the effort with First Landing State Park to start the cleanup process and had both of our boats out picking up trash and debris off the state park. So we do try to stay involved. Personally, I am a member of the steering committee for the Chesapeake Oyster Alliance, and I'm also on Representative Jen Kakin's Chesapeake Bay Advisory Council. So we're trying to be good stewards of the waterways, the bottom, and the ecology that our efforts and business provide.
Thank you, sir. Is there any questions? Mr. Harskin, please.
I was just wondering if you could address the bottom type, what I asked Chief Kenyon before.
It is mostly sandy in that area, but there is mud. There is a lot of mud in the Lynn Haven. So what we find ourselves having to do is try to work the cages every 1 to 2 months to make sure they don't sink too far into the mud. We're not working it, obviously, so we don't have extensive knowledge of this bottom, but we do expect to find it the same that we find on all our current lease.
As a follow-up, Mr. Commissioner. So of the application applied for 40 acres, would you anticipate using all 40 acres or a subset of that 40 acres that is sand?
We probably try to stick to the sandy area, the most sandy area. And again, since we don't have access to work it, we don't know what that would be. The 40 acres would be ideal, but it is a large piece of land or bottom to work as well. So until we get some experience and understand what the bottom can do for us in a positive manner and try to avoid the negative side, we would probably just work the most advantageous area. What we've done in the 3 years that we've been working our current lease is done the same thing. We've moved our lines a little bit to try to take advantage more of the sand and the shallower area so it's easier to work. But we don't know exactly what we're going to find until we start working it.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Branson.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Mr. McLaughlin, thank you. The question, what's the length? Do you got a rough estimate of the length and the width of that rectangle there?
I defer to the staff. I don't.
I can measure it real quick, but I don't have.
Okay, let me just go on and move on. What is your thoughts about using buoys over PVC pipes for marking, your perimeter marking?
Totally in favor of it. I find the PVC.
Because you know what I'm talking about here.
Absolutely. We have it on the existing lease to meet the requirements, the statutory regulations, and have no issue with it. It's a much shallower area, so we don't have nearly the amount of boat traffic there. This being deeper water, totally understand. As a much younger man, I spent a lot of time water skiing in this area. I understand what the PVC pipe means. So totally willing to work with the staff to mitigate that. We foresee using buoys to mark the lines, and we will work with the staff to make sure that we're doing it in a minimum manner to mitigate any safety issues with the general boating public.
One of the public comments that I read regarded entering and exiting out of Mill Dam Creek, which is to the south there.
Yes, sir.
And the Baylor Grounds is right there. They kind of transit right across the Baylor Grounds, or they hook right toward Broad Bay Narrows and Linkhorn Bay.
Sure.
What is the bottom? Is that an area you suspect you might plant there, or is that something that can be cut to create a little bit more of a navigation area? I don't know what the water depth is in that specific area. I usually
We have not done a lot of active research because it's not our lease to work
Right.
at this point. I would expect that we would stay more to the eastern side of the lease to keep that navigational area coming out of Mill Creek open. It does us no good. I don't want my equipment damaged, and I obviously don't want people hurt. So we are going to work in good faith to try to make it advantageous for both us and for the boating public.
Thank you, sir.
Any more questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here that wishes to speak on this matter in support or in opposition? Please come forward. Please state your name for the record and microphone.
Ben Stagg.
You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Hi, I'm Ben Stagg. I'm the current executive director for the Shellfish Growers of Virginia. Most of the commissioners know who I am, but Mr. Hand and Ms. Edwards, welcome. I had Adam Kenyon's job previously. I retired from the agency in December of 2022 as the chief of shellfish management. I actually helped write that regulation you were talking about. And I agree with Kelsey, the buoys are definitely appropriate. But specific to this application, First Landing Seafood is a member of the Shellfish Growers of Virginia. We support their application. We do believe leasing in this area is appropriate. It has been leased in the past, and that shellfish propagation is compatible with other uses in this area. It does help improve water quality. It'll increase habitat for other organisms, and usually when there's more shellfish, there's better fishing opportunities as well. I believe with appropriate marking plan, this can be successful just like the existing lease is there. and particularly First Landing's existing leases. I'm not aware when I was here of any specific complaints about that lease with their existing gear off to the side near the park. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and SGV does encourage you to approve this application.
Is there any questions for Mr. Stagg? Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak on this matter? That being said, matters before the commission. Mr. Erskine,
I make a motion to approve a staff recommendation for approval of lease.
a motion to approve staff recommendation for approval of the lease.
Second.
Got a second from Ms. Lusk. Any further discussion?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Branson.
One of the things I'd like to see is where the Baylor grounds is, maybe a 50-foot offset where that red line is, to create a little bit more navigation area for recreational vessels leaving Mill Dam Creek into the main body of Broad Bay. And if we were to do that and favorably consider it, that ground that is offset be added as a set-aside or added to the Baylor grounds, so that it can't be reapplied by another person, because it's probably not going to be many acres at all. And I also asked for an exception to the marking that would require buoyage markings rather over PVC.
So I'm not aware that we can absorb it in Baylor. I mean, Adam, can you comment to that?
Well, From my understanding is the commission has the ability to set areas aside through a vote. That's how that existing area became. It was an area that came up as a lease. That lease was denied, and during that same commission meeting, the commission made a motion and voted to set it aside as public ground. So there is a process in place where this commission could cut out a certain amount. I think that Mr. Branson said 50 feet, as well as set that aside as public ground to create maybe a little bit larger buffer coming into that creek. That there is a path forward to be able to do that.
So is,
So-
Mr. Erskine, I'm sorry.
This is your motion, right?
Yeah,
Erskine?
so I appreciate, the concern. Certainly, I thought it was maybe implied in the motion, considering the regulation, that the alternative markings could be used and buoys would be implicit in this area. But that's fine if we want to make it part of the motion. I'm certainly amenable to that. I guess my concern would be a set aside. Setting something aside makes me nervous because it sets a precedent.
So just, not to get too far into the weeds, but this is a complicated map, but in this area, Broad Bay, this is an area that the commission decided to set aside as public ground. This is an area that they decided to set aside for 10 years, and this number 3 up here is an area that's set aside indefinitely. With anything that, because the commission set it aside, they also have the opportunity to look at it in the future and unset it aside or consider applications on that area. So anything that you do today, the future associate commissions and commission members have the ability to reconsider what this area is and take applications in this area. So we're not necessarily setting a precedent. The precedent's already been set specifically in Broad Bay.
Ms. Lusk?
Can you repeat? I'm pretty sure I'm clear on this, but from my understanding, it's part of the permit is that if any structures are impeding navigation, then they will be moved.
You are correct. They cannot impede navigation with any structures or any markings. So whether we set it aside or not, it's still not permissible to be able to block that channel at all.
Thank you. That was my understanding. To me, that's enough. But
Thank you for that. Good question. Any more questions? Mr. Branson? I guess we're back at you on the we have a motion and a second. Do I have
My friendly amendment to Mr. Erskine is that we move the boundary between that lease application and the Baylor grounds approximately 50 feet further southeast and set it aside to add to the Baylor grounds that are adjacent to it. And then require a condition, a restriction, or an exception to the marking rule that requires buoyage rather than PVC or wooden stakes.
I think we just need to be clear on terminology. We can't add things to Baylor grounds.
Then just-
Baylor grounds are its own thing
Then
and
just
very
the set
highly
aside.
protected.
Then just the set aside. Does that make sense? 50 feet set aside, buoy markings over PVC pipes or wooden or stakes or whatever. Fixed objects in the water. That makes sense? Yeah.
So I would accept the friendly amendment. Outside of just not using the word set aside, it could remain vacant.
We can, the commission has the ability to set that aside as public ground. That is exactly what that blue area is. It's, you set that aside as a commission as public ground. So we can set this aside as public ground and make one big landmass there.
Okay, I understood that.
Public ground is different than Baylor. Those are separate. Those are separate statutes.
not the
So
same.
you used a
The
proper.
only reason I wanted to be clear is because there's like a whole set of statutes about Baylor ground that tell us exactly what we cannot do with Baylor ground. But public ground, or it's basically the same thing, just different.
In this situation, I would recommend setting aside as public ground since there already is an adjacent area. It would make more sense and probably be easier for the public to understand to have one large set aside versus a set aside area and a public ground set aside area adjacent to each other.
Ms. Lusk has a question.
I'm not sure how this works. Can I make a friendly amendment to the amendment?
Let's hear it.
Well, my suggestion is if we're concerned with this particular area, in lieu of setting it aside, I know that this commission before has adjusted boundary lines. And if the applicant was amenable to that, perhaps we could just adjust the boundary line a bit without setting it aside.
So basically, just consider the lease for what it is, but just have him mark it 50 feet back? Is that?
I mean, potentially, if depending on whether that would be agreeable to the applicant. I know that's something that we've done before, that would not require setting aside the ground.
Yes, that the commission has the ability to modify this application. They could approve the footprint as it is, moving that western boundary 50 feet over. However, that is open ground. As soon as we leave here today, I can receive another application for that. I can administratively deny that, saying, hey, this is in a local navigable channel. We deny that. But the applicant has the ability to appeal that, and we could be back in front of here dragging the same people out for the same exact thing. So yes, there is a path forward. I just want to make sure that that I can receive an application today for that 50 feet that we don't either set aside or assign.
Understood, thank you.
Mr. Headley?
I'm kind of confused about the activity in the area. It feels like to me that with trying to put more restrictions on it, we're putting First Landing in charge of all the boaters that are using that area. When, to my knowledge, you either have to be a captain or a boater safety course and pass courses to be able to operate a boat. Me saying that again, they should be aware of their surroundings. They should know what's in front of them. I feel very certain that it is well within their rights to have this piece exactly how they want it. For bottom cages, they're not going to impede anybody's navigation and keep the buoys to a minimum as much as possible. I think they have all right to get this approved.
All right, so is that an amendment to the amendment?
I don't know what to say.
So I have, originally we have a motion on the table to basically accept staff recommendations and a second. In order for us to accept your amendment, we're gonna have to get a second to your amendment before we go forward to it. Do I got a second to Mr. Branson's amendment? You know,
I got a question though.
Yes.
Did Associate Commissioner Erskine amend his original to include like the least amount or the smallest amount of buoys possible?
no.
I guess, Mr. Commissioner, that will be worked out in the marking plan. And maybe I should be clear that I would amend my motion to include a marking plan that's agreeable to the applicant and the commission prior to any deployment of cages.
And I believe it's the intent of staff as well as the applicant to minimize those those hazards and to work on a marking plan that's beneficial for the area.
Okay.
Yeah, which I think council has stated, it's in the regulation, they have to do it anyways. So, we already have that regulation that they have to do that, so, and I'm sure staff will make sure to address it. All right, so now we're back at square one. So basically, the amendment is it buoys only? Is that what your amendment was? Leave it alone like it originally was by staff?
Yes, sir.
So, all right, do I have a second to that?
That's no cut, no.
Let's, if I could make a suggestion just to simplify things, it seems like the set-aside piece is what we're sort of maybe not all in, what we have been discussing. How about we separate that out as a separate motion that we deal with after we deal with the lease? So the lease question would be, do we move that boundary 50 feet or not? And then the second question would be set aside.
Ms. Lewis?
But the original motion was,
Accepted
didn't
like
have
this.
didn't have anything to do with
I
moving the
agree.
lease.
I'm saying that's the amendment that we're talking about. I'm trying to simplify things just a little bit to try and get a decision on the lease itself and the boundary lines of the lease, and wait on the second part.
Sir, Mr. Erskine, Ms. Kellum.
I was going to say, if the original motion passes, we won't have to contend with the
The chair reserves the right to go back to the original motion, but I was listening to further discussion before we do that. Because I'm just about there to see if it passes before I go, and we can go back to another motion, because we're going back and forth, and the amendment hasn't changed from the original amendment for the 50-foot set aside. And we're still talking. Ms.
The original, though, didn't say going back 50 feet.
That's correct. the
Okay.
original motion. I think for the sake of time, and let's just see if the original motion carries, we'll go back to the original motion with the second, and we'll vote that. If that votes in, we'll just go with that, because the amendment is not very clear at this point. So,
Mr. Commissioner,
yes, Mr. Erskine.
if I could just make a quick comment. The applicant's testimony, I think, was clear that he recognizes the area in which he's applying for, and that he would likely, without knowing the bottom type currently, move to the east of that and not impede any navigation. That's not his goal. So I take him at his word and his testimony that he would stay away from that area. So.
Correct. That being said, let's move with the original motion in second. All those in favor of staff recommendations, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. All right. Next one, Adam, it's you again.
It's me again. So I promised that we would have two today, very similar in nature. So this second one is consideration of oyster planting ground application 2021-041. This is from Lynn Haven Oyster Company LLC, requesting approximately 85 acres of oyster planting grounds in Broad Bay in the city of Virginia Beach. Yes, this application is protested by nearby property owners. Just to orient, we are in the same place, right over on the south side here, Lynn Haven in Broad Bay. This map looks very similar, although I did not switch it out. The area which we're considering now is this large green triangle across where it says Broad Bay. This is the area that is applied for by Lynn Haven. So this was advertised in accordance with 282606, and all adjacent leaseholders and nearby property owners within 200 feet of the lease were notified. It was also put in the local newspaper. As I said earlier, we also advertise these on our website and make those available for written and public comment as well. On this particular application, we've received 18 public comments, 17 of them opposed, 1 is neutral. If all of those public comments are available in front of you in your packet, if I could summarize some of those public comments, they are very similar to what we've heard in the last one. There's concern about navigation, vessels going up and down this area. There's concern about jet skis. There's concern about recreational activities such as tubing using that peripheral area. There's concerns about the viewscape, that any kind of additional buoys or additional markings would be detrimental to the viewscape or the natural state of this Broad Bay area. With this application, staff has no objections. When we talk about impeding navigation, any kind of bottom aquaculture, including cages, could not be more than 12 inches off the bottom. This area in question is somewhere between 10 to 12 feet, depending on the tide, so there shouldn't be any bottom navigation, as well as safety hazards of individuals either swimming or falling off some kind of recreational equipment. This area as well was previously leased in 2008. It's a 10-year lease renewal, just like this will be a 10-year lease that did not meet the minimum planting or the minimum harvest. That's why renewal did not happen, and that's how we got to this application for a smaller area that you're looking at here on your screen. Again, all the areas you're seeing that brown orangish color on your screen are areas that are available to aquaculture, including cages that are currently approved by the commission. So this isn't new activity in this area. This isn't new markings in this area. These leases have been out there for a while, so individuals transiting the area are familiar with this. We're not setting some kind of new precedent or bringing some kind of gear or methodology into an area that has never had it before. The one neutral one is from the city of Virginia Beach. They comment on all applications in the Lynn Haven Broad Bay area. They request there be a setback from any main channel. You can see with this application, they have setback from this main channel, so that is not a concern. Although staff has no objection to this area for the reasons that I previously stated, 28.2.1205 allows the commission to grant or deny any permit for the use of state-owned bottomlands, taking into consideration the public and private benefits of the proposed project. This isn't one of the ones that falls into condemned areas, not on top of submerged aquatic vegetation. It's not in a navigable area, so it looks to look at other reasonable uses of subaqueous bottom. So staff is requesting guidance from the commission to approve or deny the application based upon consideration of the objections raised by local residents that are in the packets in front of you and that I summarized, comments concerning support of the request, and considerations of the public trust doctrine. I'm happy to take any questions on this application.
Any questions from the commission, from Mr. Kenyon?
The applicant is here, although this is a different applicant and it's a different company. Mr. McLaughlin is family, so he'll be speaking on behalf of this application as well.
That transition, no questions? Mr. Kenyon? Thank you. Is the applicant or representative for the applicant here wishes to speak on this matter? You're already sworn in. You can state your name for the record in the microphone, please.
Bruce McLaughlin, it's good to be back. My comments on this are very similar to the other lease that we just discussed. Realize that this lease is smack dab in the middle of Broad Bay, and it is much more heavily trafficked. So, Mr. Bransom, I recognize those concerns. This is a little bit deeper than the other lease as well. We intend to plant oysters here, and I think we may do a bottom reef or oyster bed instead of cages. That's a speculation. I'm not committing to that. But again, it would only be bottom cages at worst case with the 12-inch limit. This is new territory for us in a much deeper operation. But again, the intent is to plant oysters for the benefit of the ecology and the water, as well as benefiting our economies of scale with our business. So the model is basically the same. We would not be putting or not want to put PVC markers out for the benefit of safety and minimal buoyage as well. So very, very similar to what I had said before. And happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Any question? Mr. Erskine?
Mr. McLaughlin, how did you decide on the size and shape of that area that you're applying for 85 acres?
I don't know that I had anything to do with it. It was part of the lease that came up for renewal that was not, the harvest was met. So it's what was presented to us. When we found it available, we put the application. I believe we were the first applicant.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
Are you finding that it's getting difficult to find bottom to work in your area?
The Lynn Haven is full of mud and the sand is rare. We prefer sand, but again, our business model is to touch the cages as frequently as we need to keep them from sinking down, because we'll lose the bottom half of the cage population if we don't touch it enough. So one of the things we do to mitigate our impact with the boater traffic, we typically work at the earliest part of the day that we can by the regulation. So as sunup is coming up later and later, we're out as close to sunup as we can, and we're off the water usually by 11 or 12, just because it's hard work, as most of you know. So during the height of the day of the boat traffic, we're usually not even on the water. So that's one of the factors we take into consideration when we're operating our business.
Mr. Erskine?
Just another question. Do you know who leases has the current lease inshore of where your application is?
Yes, I believe that's Mr. Harris.
Harris, okay. It's not associated with your operation, okay.
Not us at all, no.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Is there anyone else here that wishes to speak on this matter, for or against this matter? That being said, matters before the commission. Mr. Headley,
I make a motion to approve the application.
got a motion to approve application. Do I have Ms. Luss?
Second.
I have a second from Ms. Luss. Is there any further discussion?
I just had a comment about
Mr. Erskine?
the same stipulation for the marking plan as implied in the motion. Okay.
I think Adam and Andrew are hearing it and kind of, I'm pretty sure they'll get right on it. They're in touch with the applicants.
Yeah, okay,
so.
thank you.
So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? That being said, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. All right. Public comment. All right, we take this time to receive anyone in the audience that wishes to speak during the public comment period. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak during public comment? Please come forward, ma'am. State your name for the record and the microphone.
Sir, my name is Catherine Louthen, H. Louthen, and I'm coming from Richmond, Virginia.
Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir, I do.
Proceed.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you. I am speaking in reference to our previous meeting where the discussion was concerning overfishing of the menhaden and its deleterious effects upon the osprey population. At that time, you were given some excellent scientific research that was done by the College of William and Mary. I cannot add to those. I can speak anecdotally. I come to you as a deeply concerned member of the Richmond Audubon Society, the Virginia Society of Ornithology. Obviously, I'm a birder, but I'm also a sports fisherman. I am greatly concerned about the deleterious effects of the over-harvesting menhaden, not only upon the osprey, but using them as an index species as a matter of concern also for the sports fishing. I like my rockfish. Let's see. These birds and the death of their young serve as a highly visible warning that a major food stock is becoming insufficient to support not only the osprey, but also every other creature that depends upon this menhaden. It is in your hands to avoid the loss of the osprey, as well as every other fish and bird that depends upon menhaden. Shall we go back to a silent bay, lacking in the diversity of life, such as the years following the scourge of DDT? I remember those terrible days, and I'm sure some of you do also. Seeing a bay that was nearly devoid of osprey and eagle, excuse me, please help the bay avoid those days of starvation and devastation by significantly lowering the catch limits on menhaden and strongly enforce the penalties that do exist for this overfishing. Thank you for your time. I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Is there any questions for the speaker?
Yes, sir.
Yes, how often do you all meet?
Richmond Audubon?
Yes.
During the season, which I would say would be fall to late spring, May, we meet once a month. We have numerous field trips that we are slowly expanding from basically the Richmond area into further portions of the state. We do have a number of field trips and hopefully short boat trips that are concentrated within this area. And of course, a number of our members do have homes and vacation spots in the Virginia Beach area.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any more questions for the speaker? Thank you, ma'am. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak during public comment period? All right. That makes it nice, quick. Alexa.
Good morning, Commissioner and members of the Commission. This is a public hearing on the proposal to amend Chapter 4 of VAC 20-270 pertaining to blue crab fishery to amend the season and bushel limits for the remainder of the 2023 commercial crab pot fishery and to remove discretionary time of year restrictions on fish pots. As you might recall from our May meeting, the winter dredge survey results from 2023 said that most abundances in the winter of 2022-2023 were higher than in 2021 and 2022, the previous two surveys, but lower than the surveys from 2015 through 2020. Female crabs are not overfished, and overfishing is not occurring on them, but the 2021 and 2022 exploitation rates were slightly above the target. Not at the threshold, which would be overfishing, but above target. So that's something we're keeping an eye on. And at one of our meetings in May, the Chesapeake Bay jurisdictions of Virginia, Maryland, and Potomac River Fisheries Commission agreed to maintain status quo measures from 2022. On May 24th, 2023, at the meeting of the Crab Management Advisory Committee, CMAQ approved new lower bushel limits for equity between licenses. Essentially, all of the license categories for hard crab pots would take equitable reductions during the low bushel seasons, and requested another meeting to discuss fall management measures. On June 27th, 2023, the Commission voted to maintain status quo seasons with those new lower bushel limits, and also requested a CMAQ meeting to discuss the fall management measures. Accordingly, a CMAQ meeting was held on August 3rd. CMAQ voted unanimously to recommend extending the season until December 16th for hard crab pots, with lower bushel limits beginning November 1st. Currently in regulation, the season would end November 30th, with the lower bushel limits beginning October 1st. Here's a brief look at where we are so far this year. The blue line, sort of in the middle there, is 2023 blue crab landings from March through July. The green line is 2022, which, as you'll all recall, we had a pretty low spring last year. And then the orange line on top is our 5-year average preceding 2023. So you can see we're doing better than we were last year, although last year sort of pulled ahead towards the end of summer into fall, which we don't have on here yet. But we are still below that 5-year average. Except for that we had a banner March, so that's something. We're also recommending to amend fish pot restrictions in the regulation. In 2000, fish pots were banned from certain upriver areas during the 5 days prior to the opening of the crab pot season. There were concerns that certain actors would label their pots with the buoys as fish pots, put them in these areas, and soak them, and then on opening day, switch the fish pot buoy for a crab pot buoy, and then harvest crabs on the first day of that legal season. So the commission voted to ban all fish pots in those areas during those 5 days. This is no longer an issue. Crab pots and fish pots have differences in design, most notably the cull ring you'll see present in crab pots, that make them easy to distinguish. So if a pot is pulled in those areas prior to the opening of the crab pot season, you should know whether or not it's a crab pot. So staff is recommending we remove this because it is no longer necessary for enforcement, and also it helps achieve the 25% reduction in regulatory burden as per the Office of Regulatory Management. Our changes to the regulation in section 40, we have in subsection A, changing the end of the lawful season for commercial harvest of crabs by hard crab pot from November 30th to December 16th. This is, I believe, a Saturday. And then in subsection C, it'll be unlawful for any person to place, set, fish, or leave any hard crab pot from December 17th now through March 16th, 2024. Also in section 40, we'd be eliminating subsection D, which pertains to those fish pots. So this bans any fish pots in these areas and then defines the areas. The area definitions are also used in what's currently subsection E, which would become the new subsection D. So along with changing the lettering, we would be moving those definitions from D, from old D to new D, with the exception of the definition for the Potomac River, as that falls under the jurisdiction of the Potomac River Fisheries Commission. For the bushel limits, we'd be extending the season for high bushel limits through October 31st. And then the new low bushel limits would begin November 1st and then run through December 16th, the last day recommended for that season. As stated before, the Crab Management Advisory Committee did vote unanimously to support the fall bushel limit and season changes. These changes were not brought to CMAQ by staff. The committee suggested them. They discussed, sort of a ranking. They said prices once the season ends are, kind of the best they can get. So they really wanted that season extension, but they also want to increase the amount people could take during later fall, which was why they want to extend the high bushel limits. And no public comments have been received on the season, bushel limits, or fish pots at this time. So staff recommends the commission approve amendments to Chapter 4 VAC 20-270 pertaining to blue crab fishery to amend the season and bushel limits for the remainder of the 2023 commercial crab pot fishery and to remove discretionary time of year restrictions on fish pots. And I can take any questions.
Thank you, Alexa. Good job. Any questions for Alexa? Ms. Callum?
Just a quick question. How will watermen that hold fish pot licenses become aware of the change? Will they be notified in any way, or that has been done away with?
That's something we can discuss. We don't know who's fish potting in those areas, but we would have a list of everyone with a fish pot license.
Just curious. Okay, thank you.
I would say it would be the same notification process on every regulation. So. Mr. Headley.
If I'm not mistaken, in the June commission meeting, we requested that crab drudge economic study be looked at. Has there been any progress on that?
Are you talking about the dredge survey or the dredge fishery?
Fishery.
The commission had brought up discussing the dredge fishery. We invited the committee to talk about it, and the committee voted, I believe it was 6-3, to recommend staff create a plan for an experimental winter crab dredge fishery. No more than 4 to 6 boats to start.
Has there been any discussion or plans made with that?
Staff are working on it.
Any more questions? Thank you, Alexa. Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on this matter in support or in opposition to the changes to this regulation that are proposed? All right, that being said, matters before the commission. Mr. Minor?
Move to approve staff recommendation.
Got a motion to approve staff recommendations. Do I have a second? I have a second. Second by Mrs. Kellum. Any further discussion? That being said, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Well, I believe that's all we have, yeah? Well, that concludes this meeting. Thank you all for attending. Since there's no further business, this meeting is adjourned. The next commission meeting will be held Tuesday, October 24th, 2023.
I haven't seen it.